Welcome to Thriving in the Age of Disruption podcast series. I'm so excited that you can be here in person. And I start off by having you introduce yourself.
Hi, Ramesh. Very nice to be here today. I am currently running an executive search firm called Janus Executive Search and Talent Advisory, headquartered in Hong Kong, but we are quite active in Southeast Asia, and Vietnam is actually one of our biggest markets. I've had more than 12 years of experience being an HR for large multinational corporate as well as local Vietnamese corporates. The last corporate role I held was the head of talent acquisitions for Techcombank, which is one of the leading commercial banks in Vietnam. On the personal side, I'm a mom of three. My friends know this. My first son was born with a very special condition called lissencephaly, and it was impacted by a gene mutations that impact about 1 per 4 million children in the world. So after I had him, my world was really upside down. And it's also the motivation for me to do a lot of philanthropic works as well. I'm very proud to be a mom of three.
Thank you very much for introducing yourself. Let me quickly share a little bit about this podcast series. The idea was to explore the entrepreneurial mindset. Number one, you are being resourceful, which means that you can define the right problem because find well, then it's half solved.
Right.
Number two is that you are someone who is able to manage uncertainty and take risks. And number three is you're also able to create value, both financial and non-financial, for yourself and for your other stakeholders. So when you look at that definition and you look at your journey, whether it was working in the corporates or running your own business or with philanthropy, where do you see all these things come together? And if you can share that.
Before I share a bit in terms of what I've learned so far on my journey, maybe I start with how I got into the space, right?
Yes.
When I started my career, I was having this very ultimate goal of climbing up the ladders to become chief people officer of a big company. That was my definition of success. I was doing that, right on track with that. And in 2019, a more personal crisis happened. Back then, my second child was only 1 year old, and my first son, he was about 5 years old at the time, and his health was very bad. So he was hitting the point where we had to talk to the palliative care in Vietnam about the end of life. We need to prepare for it. It was really a shock to us as a family and me personally. What I did was a corporate job, which is very exciting, but also very challenging. At that time, my son was really needing me, and I came to work early in the morning. I came home about 10 o'clock at night. Pretty much all my day were gone. And that time, his health was declining, so we spent maybe 50% of our time in hospital. I thought it was very unfair for my son as well as for my corporate to not really focus on anything. So I decided that maybe I need a break from the corporate world. It was purely out of just family situations, right? And after I made that decision, I think my very fortunate fate was that at that time when I decided to quit, the owner of the company I was working for, great leaders, and he shared with me that if you cannot continue for me as full-time because of your family situation, how about we partners and you help me on the talent acquisition front? So he was the one who gave me the first ideas of what I could do after leaving corporate. And at that time, I never thought it would evolve into something that I love so much like now. But I took on that advice from him. I started Janus. And now we're entering year number 5 of our journey. And I reflect a lot on what makes it work for me and for my clients. I think the things that you said were identifying the problem right, taking risks, creating values. And I think focus on the last one, because I think it's the things that I could contribute the most. So I think creating that mutual share values between the companies and your stakeholders, it's what keeps the business sustainable and going forward. So I think that's very important to define what kind of values your companies are bringing to the market and whether that values are what needed. We started with executive search that is very needed in Vietnam, very underserved. We have more than thousands headhunting firms in this market alone. It's very fragmented. But at the same time, the quality of deliveries, if you ask me to name a few executive search firms that I can just pick up the phone and talk to them about business and what I need. Back then when I was Techcombank, I didn't have a firm like that. So I didn't have anybody that I could just pick up and discuss with them as a peer-to-peer and ask for their advice. What's going on in the market? What's the market update? We don't have that kind of firms that could act as a trusted partner to the clients. So I saw that gap when I started my firm, and I think we wanted to position ourselves as that true partnership when we onboard any client or start any assignment. I'm proud that we've worked with some of the biggest groups in Vietnam, and they treat us like a part of them. They can just call us and share about their challenge, and we could come up immediately with the solution or with intelligence that they need. Sometimes we do that for free.
Yes.
So if they want just a quick mapping on what's available or what we think about this market or that market, we can do that for free. I think it's important to keep the companies going and to make sure that you can differentiate yourself from the rest. Creating values, I learned a lot. During my journey of setting up my companies, I never set the ambition to be the biggest or having the most fancy office. What I aim is, how do I make sure that every piece of work I bring to the market is valuable and is appreciated by the client. So I select my team very slowly because I think it's important to be sustainable rather than dilute the quality with a very large consultants team and then ended up with people fighting with each other, arguing over just a few $1,000s profit. I carefully choose my team because I want the work to be tailor-made, to be careful and attentive to details. Placing the quality in every piece of work, especially in my sector, it's also important to me. One more thing I wanted to stress on my journey as an entrepreneur is I started off as a working mom. And I understand that in every part of ourselves, there are always pillars for professional, a pillars for family, and a pillars for ourselves. How do I create an environment that can enable professionals like myself to find that balance between these two pillars? And to find that, I borrow the word ikigai from the Japanese context, is that how you make sure that you can create this environment so that other professionals who join you can be empowered to reach the same balance between different pieces of their life. That's my personal value that I put into my company. I'm proud that it's becoming differentiating points for my company as well. We allow our staff to work anywhere across the world.
Oh, wow.
And at any times of the year, we offer unlimited leave days. That's something that I don't think a lot of companies are doing. And I love the story. One of my staff, she was freshly out of the divorce, and she took off to India for a few months. And I let her work from there. And she found her partners there.
Right.
And now they move in together.
Right.
I love that story. I feel like the company that I created is not only just a professional one, a work one, but how do I empower my people, my staff to find that ikigai of their life is also something I'm striving for.
Oh, excellent. I want to underscore some of these points. The first piece is that you talked about the crisis that became the opportunity to become an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And although you didn't directly highlight this, but I guess entrepreneurship does offer to people freedom to design the life that they want. Those circumstances where you were torn between being at home for your son and also at the same time to provide the value that you've committed to your clients, entrepreneurial venture probably gave you that flexibility and freedom that impacted you significantly because you want to provide that same balance for people who work with you. And it's become part of the corporate culture or even a competitive advantage as an organization.
Yeah.
As in people work with Janus, that's what they get to work in, right?
Yeah.
What's really happening in the executive search in Vietnam? What's your advice?
Like I shared with you earlier, right? When we look at the recruitment markets in Vietnam, it's a very competitive and fragmented space. We
Yes.
have lots of recruitment firms in the country. And I still remember when I was with Techcombank as their head of talent acquisitions, I signed a contract with probably 30 of the agencies in the market
Right.
alone.
Right.
So it's a very competitive space, but at the same time, like I also point out, there is room for improvement and there is opportunities because the quality of service, especially at the executive search search level is still at the beginning. We don't have many firms that stands out in the market as the number one supplier for executive search.
So that's from the industry perspective,
Yeah.
like the service providers.
Exactly.
But what about the other aspect? Like, for instance, if you want to have someone great in tech, you got to hire from outside Vietnam.
There are a few areas that Vietnam market is still behind in terms of talent supply, and it's very rare to find a Vietnamese local who can do the job. And I can name a few of them. For example, if we look into the field of digital transformation, that
Right.
is the number one field that I think it's hard to find people in Vietnam across the sectors. Even in financial services, in retail. If you talked about digitalization or digital transformations, we don't have a lot of talents in this market to understand how to do it or how to take companies from this situation or this status to the next digitalized phase.
Right.
So for that areas, we have to look outside of Vietnam. Another area that is also quite lacking in this market is in the R&D. Research and development. It applies across sector as well. I think part of the reason because the majority of the research work or product innovation work across the multinational companies historically has been done outside of Vietnam.
All right.
So the hub was not in Vietnam. So that was part of the reason why we don't have generation of talent who can drive and lead innovation or R&D. So for R&D space, we have to go outside of the markets to search for people. Another areas that now, starting from around 2-3 years ago, we started talking in our company is to scale beyond border, to take Vietnamese company to go outside of Vietnam.
Right.
And that is something we don't have in this market for the obvious reasons, right? You don't have a lot of company in this market that have global presence. I think that is a positive sign that a lot of companies in Vietnam starting to have the needs to go outside of Vietnam. And in that space, we have to look for people who understand what it takes to scale a company beyond just a geography. And of course, that we cannot find in Vietnam because we don't have the talent pool and or the companies that offer that opportunities before. So these three areas I say would be number one. We always have to go outside of Vietnam. And then there are some other areas that are quite specific for sectors. So for example, I work a lot in financial services sectors, roles such as wealth management, digital wealth products, or technology, data leadership role, all of that, we also have to look outside of Vietnam. When it comes to talent shortage in Vietnam, is a yes and no. The mid-tiers or even the senior management level, you have a good supplies across marketing, HR, even technology in some sector as well. And data starting to catch up.
Right.
Finance, we still have good supplies of talents from the local markets. But apart from that, we have to go outside.
A related question that I've always been curious, who's more important for you, the candidate pool or the client pool?
I think all of my executive search colleagues would agree with me that we always need clients, right?
First.
We always need clients first because that's where the demand comes from. And of course, depending on the years, for instance, this year, I would say the clients or the employers have more negotiation power because we don't lack talent. The talent supply this year is still quite abundant. I think part of the reason because a lot of the layoff from the US and European markets, and also in the technology sectors, there are a lot of freezing in terms of capital. The power lean towards the employer. It's important to have high quality clients who are willing to pay, who have exciting roles to work on, and then we can match the candidate pool. So for us, it's always a balance. But I would say for this year specifically, we don't have challenge in terms of finding talents, but we focus on finding the right client, identifying which roles to work on.
I'm really happy that you were able to decode for us demand and the supply side of the executive search business. If someone was looking for a position, they will write up a CV, get in touch with your firm or some other executive search firm.
I have to be very honest that the majority of the roles that we fill for clients, we usually fill with passive candidates. So candidates who are not active on the job markets, who are very happy where they are,
Right.
who are on a great trajectory in their firm, and that's where we source the talents. If talent comes to us proactively and
Yes.
say, I'm looking for a role, of course, we welcome them with open arms, but sometimes we have to be honest with them in terms of what we have available and whether their profile fit into what we have. But the reality is the majority of the role we fill for our clients, we have to source from the passive pool. I would say a bit brutal to say, but normally active candidates have a harder time of being matched to a job rather than a passive candidate, which is how this market is.
Is it a perceived higher value because you're already employed by someone?
I don't think it's a prejudice. It's more or less the relevancy to the job, and that's always come first. So I would say, let's pick out our candidates. Both of them are coming from the same industry, have worked on the same roles, but one has been out of the markets for a few months or a few years, and one is still active in that industry. The clients would potentially leaning towards the candidates who are already active in the industry and are still active in the industry. If everything looks the same, the tendency would lean towards the one who is still active in the role.
Except if you're looking for a senior candidate and you don't have the budget, then you may look at someone who is transitioning, looking for maybe pre-retirement, has the seniority, has the experience, and may be inclined to negotiate for something different.
That can be one way that most of the time the clients fall into these categories. So either they have, like you said, limited budgets, but they still want to get people with experience.
Right.
They have been identified that role as something that they only want to have the expertise, and they don't care whether the candidates are still active in the role or not. But if the candidate has the right network, the right expertise at the right cost, then they would hire. I'm trying to emphasize that it's purely not prejudiced whether you are active in the market or not, but it's more about relevancies to the job. And sometimes candidates who are out of the market for some time or close to their retirement age, we are still able to match because their expertise and their network is what the client needs at that time.
Let me move to a new topic. Crisis can be a setback or a failure. And in that moment, you either die or you get to live because you do something. We can either freeze, fight, or flee. And it really depends on the kind of coping mechanism and the support structure that we have.
Right.
I got the crisis that you had with your son and how you dealt with it. But if you look back, what do you think were the specific coping mechanisms and support structure that had you deal with the crisis effectively?
When we first started this journey, his prognosis was that he would not pass his 10th birthday. So we are blessed he's now entering year number 11, still healthy and stable. When I first faced the reality that my child is having a very special conditions without cure, of course, there was a period where you flee from that reality.
Yes.
And I think both my husband and I trying to think that this is not true, this is not us, it's just a mistake, he'll get better. We enter the phase where we accept that he has that condition, but we also deny the reality that he will never get better. We're still holding that hope our son will become this normal, typical child. We cling to that hope. In some aspect, I think that's a way of fleeing the reality because we still hold on to a very hopeless hope because his condition is purely without cure and he would not get better. He was born with a condition called lissencephaly. So your brain would have folds that helped you function as a normal person. His brain does not develop those Girian folds.
Right.
So it's smooth.
Right.
It's other words called smooth brain condition.
Right.
And it's caused by a gene mutation that impacts 1 per 4 million child in the world. He has a lot of complications, like he has seizures very often. He has developmental delays. So for example, right now he's 10, but technically he's a 4 months baby. So he depends on us for feeding, all of the personal care. His condition will continue to be like that, and it will get worse once he gets to his teenager's age with a lot of biological change, what we were told in terms of how he would progress. But in terms of stand, be able to walk, or to talk, or learn, or do things that a typical person, I don't think he will ever be able to do it. And after 10 years, now we have come to that realization or acceptance of the reality. Rewind back to when we first started, we were trying to find different scenarios that looks hopeful. so that we can cling on to it and we go forward. That was the first coping mechanism that we used.
Yes.
And I think everybody in our family back then was using that coping mechanism, because at that time we were introduced to lots of special needs families, and each of them have different conditions. But we still see some kids were able to walk and talk and function normally. For example, take Down syndromes. You still see a lot of kids being able to progress with their life. At that time, we create these different scenarios to kind of like flee from the reality and stay in that fictional future that we create for ourselves and our son. So in a way, it fit into that areas that you said, fleeing the situation. After a few years, we realized that having that hopes and fleeing to that hopeful future kind of break us down so much, because we keep hoping and trying, and then we keep being disappointed. We kind of transition into not fight anymore, but more at ease with it. And we appreciate the day as it's come. And now thinking back about my journey, I think one of the biggest factors that really kept me going, there are two things. I think number one is this natural instinct as a mother. This is your child. Whatever you do, you cannot abandon him, right? So you have to live to fight for him, to continue care for him, and to continue give him the love that he needs. That kept me going a lot. And I think a lot of mothers can relate to it if you have a child. I think the second thing, I really agree with what you said about the support network, because without that, honestly, we cannot do anything. I couldn't do it without my mom, without my families, without my husband, and also even with my companies at that time. I was working for British American Tobacco, and all of my colleagues and the leadership team at my company were fully supporting me to take some time off and care for him during the first few years of his life. And they still keep that post for me. And when I came back, they even promoted me to a higher job. So I think without that strong support network surrounding you, I don't think you would be able to do it. And I reflect on a lot of cases that I know where they throw into depression and they choose to end their life. The biggest reason was that they lack of that support network. They just have their own depression and in their own dark world and were unable to get out of it. So I think for me, what I appreciate the most was that strong support network I had at that time, that really enabled and kept me going.
Thank you for sharing that. I know it's very personal and private. Hearing how you're dealing with it even today gives us courage, right? In terms of whatever else that we may be dealing with. It's a perspective.
Yes. I'm not shying away from share this story, because I've realized throughout the years that sharing the story really helped me to connect with a lot of others in the similar situations. And we find courage and encouragement mutually, because I'm being open and sharing about my situation. I got a lot of help and support from my friends and some others. Some lead me to very useful information about the condition. Some connect me with amazing doctors. It's what makes me who I am today. So I'm not ashamed to share him with the world, because I think it's how I inspire myself and be connected with others who are maybe going through the same journey or maybe having some other difficulties in their life. And maybe we can get connected in some way and find the inspiration and the courage to keep going in our life.
Yeah, that's so true. We just don't know who we would touch in sharing our own vulnerabilities and difficulties. It's far more impactful that we can share our low moments than our high moments. In sharing our low moments, people connect more deeply to themselves and us. Yeah. So thank you for sharing that. You talked a little bit about the philanthropy work. And so is it in this space?
I've always been in philanthropy work even before the corporate world. I used to lead a microfinance projects for Clinton Global Foundations in central Vietnam. And back then we offered the microloans to families in the central Vietnam, and we targeted specifically families with disabled children. That started even before I had kids, and I've always been in that space. I was a very strong advocate for Agent Orange victims, which are people or families impacted by the Agent Orange chemicals drops during the Vietnam War. I'm still active with the organizations that does that work. And I'm not sure whether it's fate or something, but I have always had this connection with the disabled communities, and especially with children. So all of my work has been focusing on that areas, even before I had my children. My son goes to a special school in District 3, where he has his physical therapy. And we do fundraising for the school as well to help other kids of similar situations. So that has been continuing for the past decade throughout my journey with my son. When I share with you about a time where we had to talk to the palliative care team, I found out that the palliative care practice, especially for children in Vietnam, is very underdeveloped. We don't have a lot of resources and doctors in that space in Vietnam. Depressing practice. When you talked about children, you talked about future, you talk about treatment, you talk about cure. Nobody talks about end of life for children. When I had that conversation with the palliative care team, I also realized that is very underdeveloped here. And I've been in contact with doctors and specialists from outside of Vietnam and trying to kind of bridge that with the Vietnam hospital. So we worked with experts from the US, from Singapore, to bring in some of the best practice and training to the hospitals in Vietnam.
It's really a tough place to be in. My heart goes out.
It is very tough. Do you have children?
I have
Dr.
one
Ramesh?
daughter who is 29. It's funny, right? It's all perspective. When she was growing up and she had dyslexia or dyscalculia, you think that's the end of the world, right? But then you're now talking about something else entirely, right?
Yeah.
So
I read somewhere this saying is very, I think it's really true. They say the most extraordinary things in the world is an ordinary man and an ordinary woman with their ordinary children. And that's so true in some respect, because after I learned so much about how brands works, and I've took so many courses after I had my son to understand what's really conditioned and how our brand works. And I realized that being an ordinary person, being able to do what we do every day is truly a blessing and an extraordinary work of the creator. One thing goes wrong at that tiny moment in the pregnancy can cause the entire different person. He taught me that being normal and having a normal life is actually a big blessing, and we should all be appreciative and grateful for that. For every day we pass through without any major events, without any news. People usually say no news is good news, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I just feel like he has touch every single one in our family to be happy with who we are and to be happy with what we have. And I think that is a very big lesson personally. It's also helped me to be very at ease in my work as well. Because sometimes if you still have jealousy, if you still have this unsorted part of yourself where you always feel not confident or insecure, you will always be aggressive in your work. You say bad things about people. You're trying to manipulate. You're trying to stab people on the back. And business is a tough world, right? We talk bad stuff about competitors. We're trying to beat them and things like that. But I think being a mother, and especially being a mother of a special needs child like my son, has taught me that no matter how your business is going, there will always be some way out. So there's no need for you to do dirty tricks. There's no need for you to cheat. There's no need for you to be angry at anybody. And I think that's really helped me to control my emotions and to be very at ease with myself. I've learned not to be overexcited about anything because things can go wrong very quickly. When things go wrong, I learn not to be so beaten up by it, be so down by it that I become aggressive to people or be nasty to people.
Right.
So I think in a way it's helped us to become a better person.
I'm going to ask two related questions to this. The first one is, where are you in your spiritual journey?
Spiritual, you mean in terms of religions or?
How have you defined spirituality?
I've never a religious person. Like from when I grew up, of course, we went to pagodas, we worship our ancestor, and we have Buddhas in our house. I've never grown up as a religious person. I understand why people are being religious. I was never a religious person until that happens, until my son. Back then, we went through a phase where we thought, how on earth could this happen to me? I have been a good person all my life. My family have been good people all their life. How come this happened to me? And you start questioning that and you start thinking of this as a karma on you. So I started going to pagodas more. I started to pray more. There was a period that I pray every night for my son. And I went to pagodas whenever things got rough. I just sit in the middle of the fields and I just talk to myself, let a lot of things out. I'm not asking the Buddha to give me money or to give me success. All I'm praying every day is that my family have peace. That's the only thing I pray. Peace and health.
Yes.
I don't ask for anything else. And I think if you ask me if I turn to be religious, I don't think I'm turning to be a religious person, but I believe in a mechanism that we can release our burden, or we have a spiritual anchor that we can soothe our mind. Whether it works or not, at least in our mind, we find the peace because we were able to connect with something, or we were able to say it out loud. That's where I am in terms of spiritually. I still believe in doing good works and planting good seeds. Even though the situation with my son at some point had me questions about you be a good person all in your life, why this happened to you, right?
Yeah.
But I never enter the point where I hate the world or where I don't think I should just not care about doing good stuff anymore. It turns out that my two other daughters are another blessing of planting good seeds. And I think it's because of the work that I do with my son that maybe some spiritual world grants me the ability to be mothers again and to have that strength to carry on again. So I still believe in doing good and planting good seeds and spreading the positivity to people around you.
Right.
And I still take that as one of my purpose in my work as well.
Do you think it's possible for us to live a simple life? And how would you define a simple life?
That's a great question, Dr. Ramesh, honestly. I think all of us want a simple life, to be honest, at the end of the day. We all want to come home and have a great time with family and have a bed to sleep in and wake up in the morning healthy. So I think all of us want to have that simple life.
Yes.
But we cannot have it if we don't have enough the financial foundations. We cannot have it if we don't have good partners to share with, or we don't have it if we toiling 24/7 a day to earn to make ends meet. So I think, of course, simple life, when you think about it, is actually quite costly. To be able to just relax and enjoy life takes planning to get
Yes.
there. The definition of simple life, of course, varies from people to people. But for me, it's always about being able to control your life or mold it in the way that you want, and be able to do that for your family too. And I think in order to do that, we need some planning. We need a period where we work really hard for it and prepare for it until we get there. Of course, it takes a lot of practice to be at ease with ourselves and a lot of preparation to be independent, both financially, emotionally. So that would be my take on it.
Okay, great. How would you describe thriving if you had to use 3 words?
I once talked to this mentor of mine. She said one sentence that I feel very related to myself. She said that being successful doesn't mean you become super rich or super big, but you can be comfortable or you can afford to be comfortable in your own skin. And I think that's really related to me because that's how I want it to be. So I think if you ask me to define success or define thriving, I would say that to reach that stage where we can afford to be comfortable in our own skin.
Okay, we've come to the end of our formal discussion, but I have some fun questions to ask you.
Okay.
What's your favorite book?
Oh, okay. Well, I can tell you immediately that I have 2 books that comes to my mind.
Oh, okay.
The first one is A Thousand Splendid Suns. I'm not sure if you've read it. It's a book about Afghanistan's and the situation with the Afghanistan's women back then in a very tough situations. And that book, I think, was really haunting. It stays in my mind for months in terms of the situations the protagonist was in and how she sailed through it, and the agony, the pain, the sorrows, and the story was so powerful. It stays in my mind a long time. I've never read a book that I cry so much like that. So I definitely recommend A Thousand
Okay.
Splendid Suns. Another book that I recently read is Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. It's also marvelous, excellent books, and it talks about architect, the arts of building a cathedral in England. And behind that story is a lot of the struggles between powers and love and family connections. It was a very exciting book to read. I couldn't put it down until the end. It was more than 2,000 pages or
Oh, wow.
something. It was very thick.
Yes.
Yeah, but we got through it very quickly because it's very captivating. So those two books would be something I would recommend.
If you could have dinner with anyone in the world, who would you like to have dinner with?
Okay. I've always wanted to have dinner with Mother Teresa. I think she had one motto in life that I was so inspired, and I think that was one of the motto that I always keep in what I do. She said that you can do no great things in the world, only small thing with the great love. That's really resonate with everything I've done. So yeah, so if I wanted to have dinner with anybody, that would be her.
Okay, I got that. And if you could have any kind of superpower, what would it be?
Maybe the things that would be helpful, most helpful to me, would be to cure any disease in the world by just one touch.
And what's the best advice that you ever received?
Don't give a shit.
And the worst advice?
The worst advice? Don't worry, it will be okay. I don't like that advice at all.
No? Why?
No. When people say that without knowing what you're going through, it's the most cliche and ignorant advice that you could ever give to anybody. So I always try to avoid saying to people, don't worry, it'll be okay, until I know exactly what they're going through. I've received that so much when I was dealing with my son that I was so fed up with it.
Okay, we're done with our interview. Thank you so much for sharing and creating all this for our listeners.
Thank you for having me. It's a lot of reflection as well. So
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Anne.